All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Pickens with Alabama Extension. I'm the nursery and greenhouse specialist, and I'm here with my co-host Russell Wood with the Alabama Nursery and Landscape Association. And this is our collaborative webinar series that we have the third Thursday of every month. Today, we're lucky to have Dr. Anthony Witcher with Tennessee State University. He's an associate professor there of nursery crops. And he's going to talk to us today about weed control and hydrangea production. Go ahead, Anthony. Thank you.
All right. Hey, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. And so, yeah, today I'm going to go over just some general practices and controlling weeds and hydrangea production. I will start with a little background information. So, a lot of y'all may be growing hydrangeas, and it's a very popular crop. And so, just in the U.S. alone, this was some recent economic information. So, it had about $106 million in sales. It's the number two in shrub sales in the country, and it accounts for 16% of total shrub sales. So it's a major crop for a lot of growers in the U.S. and particularly in the Southeast. Most crops are container grown. Now I'm in Middle Tennessee, and so we do have a few growers that are growing certain species in the field. But for the most part, hydrangeas are grown in containers. Most of them are going into landscapes, but there is a pretty good sizable market in the florist for cut flowers and potted plant. There's four main hydrangea species that we grow here commercially in the U.S. And so hydrangea arborescens, the smooth hydrangea, hydrangea macrophylla, big leaf hydrangea, hydrangea paniculata, panicle hydrangea, and hydrangea quercifolia, the oak leaf hydrangea. And within each species, there are dozens dozens of cultivars. And then each year we're getting more and more cultivars because apparently you cannot have enough hydrangea cultivars. And so they're very popular. It's a big market for them. So there are always some new varieties coming out, different flower colors, different plant sizes. And so I think that market's going to continue to grow. This is just an example of a smooth hydrangea. I think this is Annabelle, one of the older, more popular cultivars of smooth hydrangea. We also have the big leaf hydrangea. So these are the ones where we see the traditional mop head type flowers. They also have some different types of flower forms for the big leaf hydrangea. This is probably the biggest group, the most cultivars that are out there. I guess probably the most amount of plants that are grown. Also, these are the ones where some of the cultivars, the flowers can change colors based on soil conditions. The panicle hydrangea, they have a really nice elongated flower spike, really nice upright plants. This is Limelight, one of the older, more popular varieties. And then my personal favorite, the oak leaf hydrangea. And so it gets its name from the shape of the leaf, looks like an oak leaf. This is a native species. And so a lot of popular cultivars that are being grown of it too. So as any crop you grow in containers, you're gonna have weed problems, and so you're gonna have to manage weeds and hydrangeas just like you do any other crop. You got a few options. Hand weeding, it's probably the least favorite option and the most costly, very labor intensive. But it's something that we all have to do if you're growing a crop. Even if you're using herbicides or any other method, you still got to go through and pick out the weeds that break through, or as a herbicide breaks down, you got to go through and weed them. I like showing this picture. It's from a field day a few years ago in North Carolina. Dr. Joe Neal did a demonstration looking at hand weeding frequency. And so just to give you an idea, the plant on the far left over there, that plant was weeded every 2 weeks. So they went through, just scouted, removed the weeds every 2 weeks. And then on the other two plants on the right, they were weeded, I think, every 4 weeks and every 6 weeks. And you can see just by letting the weeds get away from you just a couple more weeks, how big they get, number one, and how much they compete with your crop. And so it's really important to go through and scout, more frequently. Even though you've got people going through more frequently, it actually costs less and takes less time to weed, to pick out the smaller weeds than it does to actually go in and wait until they're overgrown and pull them out. And so that was kind of really good graphic there. There are, a very few post-emergent herbicide options for hydrangeas, and that's because hydrangeas obviously are a broadleaf crop. Far as I know, we don't have any Roundup ready hydrangeas on the market. And so we're kind of limited on the types of post-emergent herbicides that we have that are safe to go over the top of hydrangeas. But if your main weed problem are grass weeds, there are a couple of active ingredients they can use that are safe to go over the top of hydrangeas to kill just grassy weeds. So fluazafop is one of them, and then possibly clethodim would be another one that may be safe. But you're pretty limited to just to grass weeds. Um, Obviously, pre-emergent herbicides are what we mostly use in container production. They're very effective for the most part, very safe on a lot of different plant species. Here you can kind of get an idea. This is a trial I did last year at a nursery here in Tennessee. Just to give you an idea, the plant on the left, we didn't put any herbicide in, and the pot on the right, we did have pre-emergent herbicide. And so, as you can see, they're very effective when used properly. The problem with hydrangeas is can tend to be very sensitive to pre-emergent herbicides. Since we have 4 different species, all these different cultivars, for whatever reason, they are sensitive to multiple chemistries of pre-emergent herbicides. So that's one of the issues that we have, and why we can't use some of these herbicides, or we haven't used a lot of these herbicides in production. So that's one reason a lot of growers are going to mulches. And so this is a nursery where they're using rice hulls. That tends to be the most common mulch used in container production right now. It works pretty well under most circumstances. Works really well indoors in greenhouses. Once you bring it outdoors, you can kind of run into some issues. This picture just kind of gives you an idea. First off, the wind. Wind can be an issue. If you get real high winds, it can blow the holes around and create bare spots. Also, critters. So birds, rodents can get in there, dig around, and then create bare spots in the pot. And so that's where when weed seeds hit those bare spots, they come up. And so the main thing is making sure you have a real good layer of rice hulls, and it stays consistent over time. This is a pot where they had a pretty good layer of rice hulls, an inch or so in there, but they're still having weed breakthrough. And one of the things I've seen with rice hulls is, naturally they're hydrophobic, and so they don't hold water, and that's why they make a really good mulch, because the weed seeds get on top of that mulch. There's no moisture there for them to germinate, and so they don't grow unless you overwater. And a lot of growers tend to overwater, and so if you are doing that, then you can actually saturate that top layer of rice hulls, and it won't work as well. And so those are some things to consider to make sure you have at least 1 inch layer. 1.5 works a little bit better. And so if you can do a 1.5 inch layer of rice hulls in a pot, and then try to manage your water, that's the best way to kind of get the most bang for your buck when you're using rice hulls. So going back to pre-emergent herbicides, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing this talk. I've been interested in trying to figure out, get more information on why we can't use pre-emergent herbicides, and maybe find some more that are maybe safe to use. So currently, there's only a handful of herbicides that are labeled for use in hydrangeas. 6 for macrophylla, 1 for quercifolia, and 2 that are just labeled for hydrangea species in general. This table kind of summarizes that. So like Tower and Regal OO are both labeled for hydrangea species. So they don't really say which species are safe on, or if they're safe on all of them. And so it's just kind of a general labeling. You got to be careful with Tower. That's a sprayable pre-emergent, and so that's actually, it has to be a directed spray, away from the leaves. And so number one, that's kind of hard to do in a small shrubby plant. So that's one thing to think about there. Regal OO is really a really good pre-emergent herbicide for a lot of different crops. It's really safe. There's no root activity there, and so that's a good one to use. And it's got 2 different active ingredients, and so you kind of get broad spectrum control there. Most of the herbicides on the market are labeled for hydrangea microphylla. And as you can see here, there's only 2 products in there that are labeled that have multiple active ingredients. And so Freehand, G, and OH2. The rest of them are single AI products. And most of these are granular products. And so it seems like in container production, for the most part, most growers are using the granular formulation because they are safer to go over the top of these plants. And then Gallery SC is labeled for Hydrangea quercifolia, but if you look at the label, look at the fine print, it's only labeled for one cultivar of oak leaf hydrangea. And so you really, there's not many options for using pre-emergent herbicides in hydrangea as far as comparing it to what's actually labeled for the crop. And there's reasons for that. And so this is pictures from a trial I did last year at a nursery here in Tennessee. This is a big leaf hydrangea, endless summer, one of the more popular cultivars on the market. On the left picture is just a non-treated, healthy growing plant. On the right, we've got a plant that was treated with Fortress pre-emergent. Now you can see we've got some leaf chlorosis, some yellowing of the leaves, leaf discoloration, some leaf curl. And if you look kind of at the growing tips, they're stunted or burnt. And so for whatever reason, hydrangea was sensitive to Fortress. Now, in this trial, we tested Fortress and 3 other granular herbicides on 4 different, all 4 hydrangea species, and we had 2 cultivars of each species. And this was the only cultivar that we saw damage from Fortress. And so even though we had 2 cultivars from the same species, there's differences in how individual cultivars can respond to these herbicides. And this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of the companies have been hesitant to label hydrangeas for their product because of that. Here we have a plant on the right, same plant, endless summer, that was treated with Regal 00. You can see a lot of leaf necrosis and dead tissue there. And so that was from Regal 00. Now remember, Regal 00 is labeled for hydrangea species. And so, but you kind of have to be careful about, just relying on what's on the label. With Regal 00, we also saw a little bit of damage from the second big leaf cultivar that we had in the trial, but no damage from the other 3 species. And so again, it's just going to be very cultivar and species specific, potentially on how these plants respond to these pre-emergent herbicides. Just going to give you an idea about rice hulls. So rice hulls work great, but this kind of, you can see we were really, this is actually at the same nursery though that did the herbicide trial. They're using rice hulls as a mulch. But you see they're getting some weed breakthrough there. And if you look real closely, there's some mushrooms going in there. So potentially some overwatering going on there. And so that over time, the rice hulls may not work as well on the weeds under certain conditions. And so that's because we're kind of limited on how much information we have on which herbicides are safe to use on hydrangeas. I was interested in doing kind of a more broad spectrum type trial to figure out, can we identify some products that may be more safe on hydrangeas than what we know about. And so in this trial, I did a trial last summer, and we evaluated a number of different pre-emergent herbicides on hydrangea species and different cultivars. In this trial, we included 3 of the species, and then I wanted to include at least 1 or 2 cultivars of each species. Now, you see Hydrangea paniculata is not listed there. We actually had liners of 2 cultivars, but when they came in, we potted them up, treated them, and then when I started seeing a lot of dieback, a lot of plant death, I'm like, oh wow, this trial is not going to go well for paniculata. But come to find out, we had some dying in the non-treated group too. Well, those liners had root rot, and I didn't realize it until after they'd come in and we planted them up. So we had to drop that from the trial. But we did 3 different species and then a couple of cultivars of each species. These are all the products that we evaluated in the trial. And so we had about 9 different granular pre-emergent products that covered a wide range of different active ingredients. And all of them were combination products that had 2 AI, except for Broadstar, which is just a single AI. And so we applied them at the highest labeled application rate. And then we just put them out to see what would happen. Now, so the first application we made was the one day after we transplanted the liners. And so we transplanted the liners, watered them in, and then the next day came over the top and broadcast them over the top of the plants. Now there is one little thing we did different than what most growers would do. So we went in after the application and lightly swept the leaves to get the loose granules off of the plants. And that's because Joe Neal had done some work in the past and found that by doing that, you really reduce the amount of potential damage that you're going to do from that granular herbicide to the hydrangeas. And so on the first application, we did that, came back 8 weeks later, and then we broadcast them over the top again, made a second application, but we did not sweep them after that second application. A couple of the species we grew in the shade house, and then the oak leaves we grew out in the sun. And then now I'm just going to go show you some results from that trial. I'll show you some pictures. And so we'll start with the arborescence. So this is Incrediball. The picture or the plant with the red circle around it, that's the non-treated control. So it didn't get any herbicide. And in general, we didn't really see any type of damage. The plants were green, healthy. These arborescents were kind of long and lanky. That's just because that's how they grow, and we didn't prune them during the trial. But in general, really good, healthy looking plants. When we look at the actual data that we collected from the trial, we looked at plant height, plant width, shoot dry weight, and leaf greenness. And so with Incrediball, if you look at the red line that's going across each group of bars there, that's what we got from the non-treated control. So that's the ideal type plant that we had there, and compare that to the rest of the bars from all the different herbicides that we tested. In general, we didn't see any differences in plant growth or biomass for any of the herbicides that we applied to Incrediball. Looking at the first big leaf cultivar, Let's Dance Lovable, really nice looking plants, dark green. Didn't really see any differences in growth, no yellowing or anything. And we look at the data, the same results. Similar height, similar width, no differences in dry weight, and so statistically, no differences there as far as what's going on with the herbicides compared to the non-treated controls. Which at this point, I'm very very surprised that I was expecting a lot of doom and gloom in this trial. This is the second big leaf cultivar, Penny Mac. Again, really healthy looking plants. And just to give you a little background, this is 4 months after we made the first treatment. And so these plants were treated and then grown for 4 months. And this is at the end of the trial. And so, yeah, the same trend. Really no differences in plant growth between the herbicided plants and the non-treated plants. And actually, in some instances we had numerically greater growth with the plants that were grown in the herbicides versus the control. Now, this is the oak leaf Gatzigal, one of the oak leaf cultivars. So this is the first one where we actually saw some damage occurring from the herbicides. And so just by looking at the plants, we didn't see any visual damage or visual signs of any kind of phytotoxicity or anything, but we did see some variation in growth. And it's a little bit easier to see with the data that we collected. So for plant height and plant width, with plant height, a slight reduction in growth there, but nothing statistically different. But once you get to the shoot biomass, we had a pretty big drop off in plant growth there. And in particular for these 4 products, Forte, Gemini, Regal 00, and Snapshot had statistically lower shoot biomass than compared to the non-treated control. And so there were some issues there. But when we go to look at the second cultivar for the oak leaf, the Ruby Slippers, we didn't really see that trend. And so if you look at the data, all the plant growth was the same or actually slightly better in the herbicide and some of the herbicide treatments versus the non-treated control. And so just again, within the same species, 2 different cultivars responding differently to the herbicides. So in general, across all the different species, I didn't see any noticeable damage or phytotoxicity from the herbicides. Now, this was a trial that I did here at the research center. Now, I know I showed you a picture earlier from an on-farm trial that I did where we did see some phytotoxicity from maybe 1 or 2 of the products on a specific cultivar. I did not see that in this trial here. In general, we did have a couple of cultivars that had slight reductions in growth, but we didn't see any physical indications that there was any kind of damage there. They just didn't grow as much. And then for the pre-emergent herbicides, we ended up getting similar or greater growth compared to the non-treated control, except for the one cultivar, the Gatsby Gal. So overall, I was very surprised to not see as much damage, because when you talk to people in the industry, you talk to growers, you talk to industry reps that have products, they're like, well, you might want to you're going to see some damage, or you're going to see some dying plants, and I just did not have that in this one trial. Now again, this is one research trial, and we're going to do some follow-up trials. So this year we're going to look at the two cultivars of the panicle hydrangea. We're going to do the same thing we did these other ones, screen the same herbicides, and see what kind of results we get there. I'm also going to do a follow-up trial looking at sweeping the granules off the leaves versus leaving them on there from the initial application, because it may be just taking the granules off at that first application was enough to get the plants growing, get them rooted in, and by the second application, maybe it's not an issue. And so that's something we're going to look at to kind of tease out what's going on there. And then we're also in the future gonna look at some different mulches and hydrangeas, because we know a lot of people are using rice hulls. It works pretty well in most cases, but there are some other materials on the market that may provide similar results, or maybe improve results. Now, so I'm gonna give a disclaimer. So because just because one trial I show that we have these products are safe to put on hydrangeas, doesn't mean you can go out there and just do it use it, because I don't want you to have a lot of dead plants. And so if you are interested in using testing some other non-labeled herbicides on hydrangeas, just make sure to test a small group of plants at first, and do it for each cultivar that you're growing, and then wait a couple months. Because it may take a month or two for those visual signs of damage to show up. And also, you may not even see any damage. It may just be reduced growth or stunting in that crop. And so those are things to look for before you really start using these products on a wide level. So I'm going to talk just to kind of give you an idea or option on some mulches that are out there. And so obviously rice hulls is the most popular choice right now. Some people are using pine bark nuggets or mini nuggets and pine bark mulch. Just in general, the coarser the material when it comes to pine bark, the more effective it's going to be at weed control, because the more the finer materials that you have, or particle sizes you have in that mulch, the more water it's going to hold, and the more likely those weed seeds, once they get on top of that layer, they're going to be able to germinate a lot better the more moisture there is there. And so just some things to think about. Now I have been working on some other alternative type mulches for container production. I've done a lot of work in propagation, cutting propagation. And I've been using pine pellets and paper pellets. And so these materials are actually marketed and used for animal bedding, but I started using them to see if they would actually work as a good mulch layer in container production, and they work really well in propagation. Also, another material that's come on the market recently in the last couple of years is chopped miscanthus. And so there's kind of a byproduct of the bioenergy industry. And so where they're growing a lot of switchgrass, and they harvest it, they chip it up, and they're making different products out of it. They're making mulches and different absorbents and everything. And so I started evaluating it potentially as a mulch too. So we're going to see how that works. For the pine pellets and paper pellets, they're really cool. So it's similar to what you would get by a product for like the pellet grills. And so, but it's just a compressed sawdust into a pellet, and it really doesn't have anything else in it other than the binding material. And so that's why it's safe for animal bedding. It didn't have any other chemicals or anything in it. And so the fun thing is, so you apply it as a dry material, but once you irrigate it and saturate it, those pellets expand and blow up and make a really good barrier tossed across the top of the crop, the pot. And the same thing for paper pellets. They don't expand as much, but once you put them in there, they expand, and they do fill in the gaps and everything, make a really good barrier. The only caveat to using these type materials is, so if you're using rice hulls, you would typically just leave like an inch or 2 inch gap at the top of your pot, and then fill that gap with rice hulls. But with these materials, since they expand, you kind of have a better better understanding of how much to put in there. So you have to put like a layer or 1.5 layers of these pellets in there, and then that will expand into about 1.5 inches layer after it's watered in. And so just some things to think about. Um, this is some pictures of a weed trial that we did this year, kind of comparing how the weed seed germination would be in these different mulch products. And so on the left here, on the top left picture, that's just it's a 5.5 inch container, square container, where we seeded in some bittercress seeds. And so that's just the non-treated. There's no mulch, no herbicide in that pot. And so this is after about 8 weeks. And then the bottom left picture, we have a pot where we've treated it with a pre-emergent herbicide. So as you can see, it's working pretty well, getting really good control. And then we have the different mulches. And so rice hulls and pine pellets had excellent control of bittercress. And even the miscanthus straw had a little bit of breakthrough, but still, really good control compared to the non-treated. The pine bark products, there are a little bit more breakthrough in those. And so those aren't quite as effective as the other mulches, but still a pretty good job compared to no mulch at all. And then we also did the same trial with large crabgrass. And so it's kind of the same setup, the non-treated over there at the top left, and then herbicide treated at the bottom left. And then we can see a little bit of breakthrough with the rice hulls, but still, really effective control there. Pine pellets, almost nothing growing in that, and you can't really see it from this picture, but there's some small, really tiny seedlings growing in the pine pellet. So what happens is the seeds will germinate, but they won't grow because there's no nutrients in the pine pellet layer, and so they can't get any nutrients from that, and it actually keeps those roots from penetrating down into the potting mix, and so they can't access the water and nutrients from the potting mix. So it creates a really good barrier at the top of that pot. Miscanthus straw, it did not work well at all for crabgrass, and neither did the two pine bark products. And so we're going to be doing a lot more research with this, maybe looking at different weed species and looking at how long the mulches last over time, just to give growers a better idea about what works on specific weeds. And so that's going to wrap up my presentation. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to y'all, and I'll entertain any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Anthony. That was great. Does anybody have any questions? I'll ask one, Anthony. When you were going through the labels, is there any spray applied pre-emergents that are labeled for any hydrangea species?
Yeah, the only two that I found were the gallery. That was a sprayable formulation, and again, that was only on that one cultivar of oak leaf hydrangea, and then the tower. But tower was a directed spray, and so you can't go over the top. And so I need to go back through. But when I initially looked at this, I did not find any sprayables that were safe over the top other than gallery. And gallery's one of the safest chemistries we have out there as far as going over the top of a lot of different ornamental crops. And so maybe it just hasn't been tested enough. And that's something that we need to look into is looking at some sprayable formulations to see, which ones are actually safe, because I think, they are cheaper or more cost effective than some of the granulars. So that would be great if we could find something to go over the top that's safe on it. That's something we can look into.
Great. We got a couple of questions or comments in the chat. DJ Fuller asked, how comfortable do you feel about freehand over hydrangeas?
Freehand is the one that most people are using. It seems to be the safest on a lot of the different hydrangeas that are out there. And if a grower is using a pre-emergent, that's the one they're using, because it has shown that to be the safest on hydrangeas. It's labeled for the big leaf hydrangea. Just from what I've seen, it's several of them can be safe on multiple species, but that's the one. If you're going to try a herbicide, a pre-emergent in hydrangea, that's the one to start with. That and OH2 seem to be, the ones that are relatively safe in a lot of different ones.
Great. We got Chris Monroe asked, how did you sweep the foliage? Most common practice in a nursery would be leaf blowers.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to think of. What would be a cost-effective way in the nursery? Like we just took our hand because we have, small little plot, but in large scale, a leaf blower, that would be one option. I just don't know how it would affect the distribution in the pot. So if you're blowing too far down on the surface of the container, you're blowing the granules around there, and so you're really disrupting that barrier. And so I don't know if that would be the best option. Maybe some type of long broom on a long like a long beam or something to just basically go over the top of the plants to kind of, because it doesn't take much to take the granules off, because you're applying it, you're going to be applying it to dry foliage, and so it's not going to take much to just kind of run something over a broom or a beam over the top of those to do it. And so if you're applying these in small blocks, that might be something you could do. But yeah, that's probably something that a grower would have to engineer, or something, an easy, cost-effective way to do that.
I see that Jim Owen has got his hand raised. Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just great presentation. Same question as DJ. So you're just getting those pine pellets out of feed store for animal bedding? Is that what just making sure I understood?
Yes, so it's that's exactly why I went down to Tractor Supply, bought a couple of bags of it, and we've been testing it there. I did work with a local grower because they like some of the research that I found. They tried it on, and then their propagation houses, and so there are some, I think, some sources where you can get it in bigger packages, basically. So we bought like a 40-pound bag, but you can get it in pallets or whatever. And so, yeah, and cost wise, if you buy it in bulk, it is similar to rice hulls as far as the area that you're covering. So it's going to be a similar cost to the rice hulls. And so it's a good alternative if you're wanting to try something different. But yeah, you can find some suppliers and buy it in bulk. Yep.
We got from Alexander Krob. I would assume that the paper and the pine pellets hold water well. This seems counterintuitive to a good mulch, but the trials speak for themselves. Do these pellets dry well between irrigation cycles, or is there another factor that prevents germination in the expanded pellets?
So yeah, I totally agree. When I started doing this, I was like, I don't know how well this is going to work, because it's basically just a nice moisture retention area for weeds to grow. But we found, I think, a couple of things are going on there. So there may be a little bit of allelopathy going on, some phytotoxicity from the sawdust, because we know if you're using fresh sawdust, it's really going to be high carbon to nitrogen ratio. There's not a lot of nutrients in it, and so number one, it's starving the seedlings, and so there's no nutrients there. And so that's part of. There may be some components in the pine itself that are phytotoxic to seeds, to where they don't grow as well. And then it's just that physical barrier of not being able, that root not being able to penetrate through that barrier down into the pine bark. And so that's part of it. And so yeah, there's multiple things going on there. And so it's a physical, and there's also a chemical component to it. Sorry, did I answer all parts of that question?
Yeah, I believe so. And then Jim said, so would you suggest putting the fertilizer underneath the wood pellets, or for the mulch, like a wood mulch like that?
So I've only used, so we did the one trial this year. I don't. So in general, yes, I would consider putting it. I would definitely recommend putting it under the mulch layer. I know there's been some work done in rice hulls where they've looked at putting the fertilizer on top and below the mulch layer, and pine bark too. I haven't done that with the pine pellets, and so, but just because of how much the sawdust will tie up some nutrients, I definitely will recommend putting it under the mulch layer. And so most growers, if you're incorporating, it's not a big deal. But if you're top dressing, yeah, if it's a one season crop, it's not a big deal to put the fertilizer down and then put the mulch on top of it. But if you've got a multi-season crop, I don't know how much top dressing over the mulch layer will affect how much nutrients will leach through there. That's something we need to look at.
It's interesting. With the allelopathy, I think Debelina in Michigan State's been looking at that with some mulches. So it'd be kind of interesting to see, if she's done anything with pine wood. That'd be pretty neat.
Yeah.
Neat to see. Well, great. Well, does anybody have any other questions, either in the chat or in the audience? All right, great. Well, good deal. All right. Well, thanks everyone. And thank you, Anthony. We appreciate your time today. This was a great presentation and I think we all learned a lot. So
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks.